Hi everyone, it's Evelyn. And a few days ago, I received an email from one of the seed companies that I purchased from Canada, called Vessies, and the title of the email was "Appease the Bees." And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. I wonder what they have on there that I already have. So I opened the link and I checked out the things that they were linking towards, and what they had was sedum, aster, dianthus, astilbe, hellebores, lavender, thyme, crocosmia, coneflower, and catmint. So I have sedum, lavender, and thyme. I have to look at my notes so I don't forget which ones I have. But that got me really thinking about, well, what else do I have that they're not mentioning in my cut flower garden beds that the bees really love? Now, I already know that they love poppies, they love rhododendrons, they love globe thistle, and they absolutely love borage. So I found an article called, now let me read the name of it so I get it right. It's called "The Best Cut Flower Varieties to Grow in a Pollinator Garden" by Gardenary. Got to get the name right. And it listed a few annuals and it listed a few perennials. Now for the annuals, the first thing it listed was sunflowers. The thing is that if you're a cut flower garden, you're cutting your sunflowers before they're actually opened up. In fact, they're just starting to crack open. And bees aren't going to get to them at that time. So while sunflowers are, of course, a great annual cut flower to have that bees will love, not if you're a cut flower farmer, that's one that actually isn't going to work because the bees will never see the pollen. That's why you're cutting them before they've opened up, because you want to cut them before they get pollinated. So just bear that in mind. And that's why, a lot of people say, oh, you shouldn't grow the pro cuts because they don't have pollen for the bee. Well, it doesn't really matter with a sunflower because you're cutting it before the bees get to the pollen anyway. And honestly, I've left a couple of, I had a one gold light that for whatever reason turned into a giant. So clearly I didn't cut it as a cut flower because the flower head was practically bigger than my head. And the bees were still getting pollen from it. So there is still pollen in the pollenless sunflowers. It's just they're not dropping pollen onto the table. So they're not pollen-less. They're pollen dropping less. I don't know how else to say that. The pollen's still in there. It's just deeper, so it doesn't fall out as easy. Anyway, the other annuals that they mentioned was cosmos, which I do grow. Zinnias and marigolds, of which I've tried and I don't like and will never grow again. So whether the bees like them or not, they are not making an appearance in my cut flower garden. After that, they went on to a few perennials, and the perennials that they mentioned are salvia, never grown it, black-eyed Susans, or Rudbeckia hirta is its other name. I don't like black-eyed Susans. I've never grown them. I just don't like the look of them. And dahlias, of course. Nowhere could I find globe thistle, rhododendrons, poppies, or borage on any of the lists of flowers that bees love. Well, I know they love those because all four of those in my garden hums with bees. I mean, if you want to find a bee, go to one of those four flowers. They will be, the amount of bees that you find on those flowers compared to all the rest, with the exception of maybe dahlias, because they really do love the dahlias as well, it's just astronomical. I mean, you can hear the humming from a distance, especially for the rhododendrons, because that's a big plant with lots of flowers on it. And you can hear it from a distance, and you walk up and, it looks like there's thousands of bees going to all the different flower heads. So how is it that none of those make the list? So I decided to keep researching. And in the process, I discovered a few other top bee favorites. And these are ones that I do have growing. So this is exciting because pansies is in there, and I'm growing frizzle sizzle pansies for the first time. So I'm excited about that. Sweet peas. Okay, yes, I did know that, but they're not as, the bees don't go as crazy. I mean, they're all over them, but they're not as crazy about them as those previous four. Then foxgloves, yay, I've got those. I mean, they're a native plant here, so they pop up like a weed all over my garden. I actually have to weed some of them out because I get so many of them. Alliums, which I grow quite a few of, and snapdragons. So all of those are ones that I grow, and bees apparently love. They also love Shasta daisies, which is another native weed in my area. And even though I weed them out as best I can, they still pop up some places. And I literally let them grow for the bees because they're if they're growing in a place where they're not in my way, fine, the bees can enjoy them. They don't do well in bouquets, Shasta daisies, because they grow along the sides of the roads here. So people are going to see a Shasta daisy in a bouquet. They're going to go, you know, seriously, you can pull over anywhere and cut Shasta daisies. The highways are full of them. Mind you, the highways are full of lupins and foxgloves as well. And yet people still love the lupins and foxgloves because those two are native here. So the other thing that they had on the list that I could find, not they, but all the articles that I researched that I found on the list that bees love are asters, phlox, and lupins, none of which I grow. I might try lupins one day. I tried phlox, hated it. Asters, I've never had an interest in growing asters. I still could not find a single article on cut flowers or flowers that bees love that listed poppies, borage, rhododendrons, or globe thistle. You know, it doesn't make any sense. So I decided to actually look up those 4 specific flowers in relation to bees. And I found a few really interesting facts, which I thought I'd share with you. So we're going to start with the globe thistle. I'm going to read about the interesting facts from a printout that I did because I want to make sure I get the name of the articles right, as well as whoever wrote it. And it's going to be quotes, so I want to get the quotes right as well. So for globe thistles, the article was written by Puget Sound Beekeepers Association. And Puget Sound is in my neck of the woods, so it's very relatable to where I live. So the article is called Bee Lunch, Globe Thistle Echinops Retro is Something to Dance About. And what they said is that this midsummer flower will have bees falling all over themselves to work, and it is not uncommon to see multiple types of bees and butterflies working a single flower head in harmony. And I mean, if you look at the picture that I took in my garden, clearly that's true because there's only 3 bees on this one particular globe thistle head, and all 3 bees are a completely different kind. We get lots of solitary bees, excuse me, solitary bees in our neck of the woods, so we do get quite a few varieties. And for a while there, the house has since sold and there's new owners, but the previous owners had 3 beehives. And the thing with honeybees is they are bullies to solitary bees. And we did notice our solitary bee population really go down while those 3 honey hives were there. And because of that, the bee population itself, as far as I'm concerned, went down. So just because you get a honeybee hive doesn't mean you're doing any favors for the bee populations, because honeybees are not native, at least not to where I live. So if they're pushing the native bees out of the territory, then they're actually doing a disservice. And yeah, and I'm really glad to see that now that those hives are gone, the native bees are coming back. Just an interesting perspective from my point of view. Okay, so let's go on to, let's talk about poppies. So poppies, I read an article called Growing Poppies for Seeds and Bees, and it was written by groveg.com. And the interesting fact that I'm quoting is that scientists have found that poppy pollen is remarkably clean, containing few fungi or mycotoxins. In many parts of Europe, the solitary poppy mason bee, which is called Hoplotus papaverus, lines its underground nest with colorful poppy petals. Isn't that cool? I thought that was just fascinating. Okay, so then we're going to move on to borage. So this article is called Borage Pollinator Plant Extraordinaire, and it was written by Flights of Fancy Honeybee Company. So what they say This is that borage is a pretty important plant to both honeybees and bumblebees alike. Its prolific nectar and pollen production is what makes borage an invaluable plant in the pollinator garden. As a food source for bumblebees and honeybees, borage refills with nectar every 2 to 5 minutes. That's amazing. Throughout the day. Unlike most, okay, let me say that better. The borage refills with nectar every 2 to 5 minutes throughout the day, unlike most plants, and it continues to yield nectar even in cold weather, which I'm going to pause the article right now for a sec, which is really interesting because we actually get borage blooms all winter long. So that means those borage, well, you know, if it drops too cold, we don't get any blooms, but then when it warms up a bit again, we do. And we never get seriously cold to kill the plants off. Shouldn't say never, once or twice, once or twice a winter. So that's really good to know, is that the borage is continuing to produce nectar all throughout the year, as long as there's flowers, of course, and it's refurbishing its nectar supply every 3 to 5 minutes. That is so cool. Anyway, back to the article. Most pollinators will ignore the plant's downward-facing blooms, but there is a reason for these flowers with a challenging angle. It prevents rainwater and morning dew from diluting the plant's nectar for the bees. So the other pollinators would be things like hummingbirds and butterflies. And because they're downward-facing, that constant replenishing of the nectar doesn't get watered down by rain. I mean, I loved borage before. Now I just love it 100 times more. What a cool fact. So then we're going to move on to the rhododendrons, which is another one that never showed up in any of the pollinator lists. And I found this really cool article. It is from an answer to a question asking, is rhododendron pollen toxic? And the question was answered by Adventures in Beeland's blog. So this is what they said. This is so cool. Rhododendron ponticum, which is, by the way, just one type of rhododendron. It's not all of them, but I don't care. This factoid is just fascinating. Rhododendron ponticum is known as a source of toxic nectar, which causes bees to produce mad honey, used by European armies throughout the ages as a weapon of war. The honey will be left in the path of the invading legions. The soldiers would eat the sweet treat and end up vomiting and dizzy from granotoxin, a toxin contained in rhododendron honey. The effects rarely prove fatal to humans, but probably would have halted or slowed down the armies for a while. I can't say that word right. Granotoxin is I'll put the word up on the screen because I can't say it. And by the way, earlier I said allium, I meant allium. I cannot get myself to switch from saying allium to allium. So alliums or alliums, alliums is just a mispronunciation of that word. Anyway, back to this. Granotoxin is the plant's defense against herbivore attack. So, anyway, that was all good food for thought, although the rhodopollen is not good food for thought, but it is certainly food for thought. Hope you enjoyed this video. See you next week. Bye.